Hey, lighten up, jerk!
So, Israel, if you're not sure, if you were starting to think that it's 100% Jewish, that's not quite true. If you thought it's only about half Jewish and the other half Arab/Muslim, that's not quite true either. As usual, the truth falls in the middle. So Israel as a whole, let's call it 3/4 to 80% Jewish. Okay, so 80% Jewish, 15% Muslim, and about 5% Christian. And that 5% Christian counts a group that both sides tend to forget and is really one of the most persecuted groups, the Christian Arabs. Okay, we usually call them them the Israeli Arabs.
We just usually call them dead because that's they don't. There's not very many that
is not there. Untrue because admittedly the Jews both on a person to person level and on a governmental level tends to forget about them. The Israeli Muslims tend to persecute actively against them. And they are a small group, but most of the Christians in Israel are not white Christians that have, immigrated, but they are those Christian Arabs. Okay. So because you have, but still it's 15% versus 5%. So there are 3 times as many Muslims, mostly Muslim Arabs, as there are Christians in Israel among those two minorities. You have really the most persecuted group are that small group of Christian Arabs. So now we're just getting into the 80% of Jews, and Israel is roughly 10 million people, so there are about 8 million Jews in Israel. And out of those, as I said before, about 80% of that number are secular, and only 20% are observant/Orthodox. Okay. And yet, in terms of political power, it's about 50-50 in the legislature between the religious parties, okay, the Orthodox parties, and everyone else. Okay.
Really quick question.
Sure.
I guess the denomination, do they also have political power? Do they kind of stand in for say in the American system, like the Democrats or the Republicans or the Independents and things like that?
So I'm glad you asked that because right before the podcast, I gave Robert a very quick crash course on Israeli politics.
Our political system is messy?
Okay.
Take a look at this shit.
So first of all, I was just explaining their parliament, their legislature.
Yeah.
But even before that, the way that the deal was struck for modern Israel, and in 1 minute, I'll back up and give you I hope I'll keep it to 5-minute, very quick intro to modern Israel, okay? Not just from 1948 on, but from, let's call it 1880 on, because that's really
it was like right around in the 19th, early 20th century when this kind of was getting started.
The what we call the Aliyah movements, which means the immigration movements of Jews back from around the world, primarily Eastern Europe, back to Israel started right around 1880.
The reverse diaspora.
The reverse diaspora, exactly. They started immigrating back in, so I'll explain that in a second. But as you get that in your head, we'll jump back forward to modern Israel. To answer your question directly and in a short way, the Orthodox control the judiciary. Okay. So the courts, whenever there is a rule or a ruling that's not covered by their very short modern constitution, it goes back to Old Testament law. Talmudic law specifically, which is kind of our version of the latter. Scripture is written around the same time as the New Testament, but it goes back to that ancient law. Okay. And the judges rule as they will. But that was a deal that Ben-Gurion, the first and probably most famous Israeli prime minister, made, that the executive and legislative branches would be run secularly, because that was the UN decision to order the creation of a secular Jewish state. That's the actual thing that the Israelis in the period between 1945 and 48.
And the powers that be.
And the powers, that's the way that the Israelis wanted it. And even then, it was about the same as it was now, more or less. It was 80% were secular, and therefore that secular Jewish majority decided that they wanted a secular Jewish state. Makes a lot of sense, right? Okay, because that way it welcomes everyone in. If you're Orthodox, you're just as welcome as if you're secular. Whereas if the state was run by the Orthodoxy, the secular Jews, the other 80, the whole 80%, wouldn't be as welcome. And so that, in terms of the Orthodox covering all judicial rulings and being at the end responsible for that, does it ever come up, or does it come up a lot? On the actual legal rulings, not that often, except for one major thing. The Orthodox rabbis, not the conservative or reform or secular, but the Orthodox rabbis are the only ones who have the power of marriage and divorce. So if you want to get married in Israel, you don't have to suddenly prove or fake that you're Orthodox, but you do have to get married by an Orthodox rabbi.
Interesting.
If you're Jewish, if you're Muslim or Christian, then it's a separate category entirely.
So if you want the option to divorce, then you have to go and get married by an Orthodox rabbi,
whether you want it or not.
Oh, so regardless,
you can always get they do, however, because of the original immigration policies and laws that Israel, which basically say that Israel welcomes in any Jew from around the world. And the definition of what is a Jew is a wholly complex thing, but the bottom line is that counts secular Jews, okay? Not just welcomes in religious or middle line or Orthodox Jews, but it welcomes in all Jews. So even if you get married, if you have any either Jewish blood, a Jewish parent, a Jewish grandparent, or even if that's unclear, but you are clearly
or a Jew breathed on you at one point.
If you are, and
I was about to ask, what about Elizabeth Warren levels of being Jew?
And the equivalent of being Native American? Yeah, that's an interesting case. But supposedly her DNA test, I don't think it matters that it was 5 or 6 or 29 generations in the past.
Right.
It did show that she had a little bit of a Native American blood.
Right.
If you make that comparison to Judaism, yeah, that's Jewish enough. Okay. And so, but that's a whole nother thing. In terms of the marriage thing, if you get married, outside, say I'm an American and I get married and then I want to immigrate to Israel where they recognize my marriage, the answer is yes. Okay. Even if I get married in just a completely civil without any rabbi in America, they will recognize my marriage and they'll recognize my wife and eventual children as Jewish regardless. Yeah. Okay. The being a half Jew is one of the complex things, and we're not going to get into that today because that's a very divisive issue, and it's also over my head on the exact specifics.